How's it going guys, Chris here, and today I'm going to be showing you all the different main zombie types and infected variants in Dying Light 2 Stay Human. There's quite a lot of different zombies you'll encounter throughout the game, all with their own unique characteristics. This guide is mainly focusing on the base game infected types, not including any DLC monsters or standalone bosses found in specific quests, but the many different zombie types you can expect to see throughout Dying Light 2 while playing the game. So let's start off with the basics. One type of infected you're going to be very familiar with when you play Dying Light 2 is the biter. One of the more common types of infected, biters are basically the regular zombies that you'll see practically everywhere in the game. Many looking slightly different to each other, wearing different clothes and sometimes even uniforms. These guys have been infected by the virus for quite a while, and are generally quite slow and easy to avoid or kill due to their sluggish nature. With that said, they can still run at you and will still pose a problem if you're cornered or surrounded, as although they only deal minimal damage, together they can still be dangerous enough to take you down, especially if you're low on health. The sunlight can be harmful to them, which is often why you'll find a lot of them sleeping indoors through the day. But when the night falls, the biters become more vicious and aggressive, with a lot of the ones indoors also venturing outside, making the streets even more dangerous. Biters can occasionally grab you, especially at the night time, but this itself doesn't do a great deal of damage, though it does slow you down, allowing more biters and other infected types in the area to gang up on you if you're not careful. A very similar infected type to the biter is the degenerate, which are essentially biters that have had the virus for a very long time. These guys are basically weaker and slower, due to their longer exposure to the virus and due to the way the sunlight decays them over time. Degenerates don't really pose much of a threat to the player, being very easy to avoid and fight down to their dopey characteristics, and they can often be found amongst the normal biters found around the city, often working with them to try and overcome you. Not long after a human catches the virus and starts to turn, the initial stage of the infection turns them into virals. At this point, they're kinda somewhere in between being a human and a zombie, as they still have some of their humanity intact, but are also overwhelmed by aggression. This also means that the virals still have the higher fitness, awareness and energy levels that a human would have, before they become completely overtaken by the virus, turning them into a biter, before the sunlight decays them even further. Their bodies are stronger and faster at this stage, not completely succumb to the virus just yet, and this, combined with their overwhelming aggression, can make them highly dangerous, able to dodge your attacks and move around in irregular patterns, making them more difficult to fight than normal. Instead of biting you, they'll often swing punches and claw at you instead, often working in groups to force you into corners and chase you over the rooftops. They're particularly sensitive to light and sound at this stage too, trying to avoid sunlight whenever possible, whilst also being attracted by loud noises such as explosions, which will still be enough to encourage them out of their dark hiding spots through the day, to investigate the sound, even though they can't stand the sun. Another specific type of infected that you'll be able to find in Dying Light 2 is the HAZMAT, which is simply just another type of biter, but one that wears a HAZMAT suit. Now these guys aren't quite as common as your typical biters, but they can still be found amongst them, easily seen with their brightly coloured overalls. You might remember these HAZMAT gas tank infected from the first game, and if you also remember, these zombies also carry a highly explosive tank on their backs, which, if you give a good smack, will detonate a few seconds later. Though you might want to get out of the way before it does, of course. This is going to blow up everything within the surrounding area, taking care of other infected, but at the cost of often summoning those virals, who are usually going to come running to see what all the noise is about. Another returning infected type from the first game is the GOON, which is essentially a beefed up zombie with extra strength at the expense of speed. These guys have the same characteristics as before, being slow and clumsy, though looking a little bit different than in the first game, now having a gigantic right arm. I suppose these guys do spend a lot of time alone at the end of the day. With that said, they still have a very similar kind of attack pattern as in the first game, swinging and slamming heavy weapons, knocking you down if you get too close. Having extra power forces you to be more careful around them, as getting hit will have bigger consequences. You'll have to try and time your attacks right, jumping in and out in between the goon swings, which can't be blocked like a normal zombie attacks, and it might take longer to bring them down due to their sheer size and strength. Because of this, it can often be beneficial to take advantage of throwables like molotovs, ranged weapons like the bow, along with other things that you can find in the environment, like explosive canisters and spears, so that you can inflict damage without putting yourself in danger. A new zombie type found in Dying Light 2 is the BANSHEE, a small but agile monster that's kind of the opposite of the GOON, using agility to its advantage as opposed to strength and power. Banshees can be identified by their long talons and glowing skin, and are typically quite aggressive, lashing out at you with their sharp claws, pouncing on you from a distance too, which can sometimes be awkward to avoid. If there's other zombies wandering around in the area, they'll sometimes jump on their backs and sort of surf on them while trying to attack you from above. Thankfully for you, Banshees are relatively weak, as although they can be a bit of a pest and are sometimes trickier to dodge, it doesn't take too many hits to bring them down in a fight. While surfing other zombies getting ready to launch itself at you, try and knock it down to prevent an upcoming attack. Otherwise, you might just have to chase it around for a bit in order to beat it up, as it doesn't like to stay close to you for very long and often prefers to use hit and run tactics instead, climbing buildings and obstacles quickly to get away. Another new zombie type that's made its way into Dying Light 2 is the Howler, which in a way kinda does a similar thing to the Screamer in the first game, basically acting as an alarm to attract other infected and alert them of your presence. A Howler is essentially a viral that would have transformed into a volatile if it wasn't for a bunch of GRE chemicals which attacked its lungs, forcing it to emit loud screams while the chemicals boil in its body, which is triggered by spotting a human. Howlers can be found policing the streets at night, and although they don't pose much of a threat by themselves, you still don't exactly want to be spotted by one, as they'll howl to the high heavens and call all the nearby infected to your location, basically making it the world's ugliest snitch. Virals will often come running at night, and a chase will usually begin. Though if you can kill the Howler before it sees you or makes any noise, then you can prevent this from happening, which is why it can often be good to take them down from above using stealth or by using ranged weapons, which is generally easy to do due to the fact that they don't move around much. Though usually, because there's so many of them at night time, if you're just wandering around the streets, you're generally best just sticking to the rooftops and staying out of their way, where they can't see you. Next up, we've got yet another new zombie type called the Spitter, that, as you can probably guess by the name, spits out acidic phlegm over range to try and burn you from a distance. These guys play out in a very similar way to the Toads from the first game, not posing much of a threat up close, but generally being more effective further away. That's not to say that they still can't deal any close range damage however, as if you get too close to them, they can still spray you with that acidic phlegm, covering the area in front of it. Spitters aren't particularly strong and can be taken down pretty easily, though much like the Toads in Dying Light 1, they can be a bit of a nuisance, especially if you're trying to deal with multiple enemies at once and they're just stood in the distance shooting acid at you. It can often be best to fight fire with fire, shooting them back with ranged attacks, while trying to dodge their attacks at the same time too. Though if you're close by, you could always just run by and pummel it with melee attacks, before it has time to do much damage with that spray. Bolters are back from the first game, and just like before, they essentially just act like running piñatas, being practically defenseless, dashing away whenever they see you coming. They don't pose any threat at all, and are mainly just found scavenging on corpses lying around on the city streets at night. Identifiable by their orange glowing lumpy skin, bolters are really fast and agile, and don't really want to hang around for a fight, as they'll dash off away from the area on sight, leaving behind a trail of yellow footprints for you to track and follow in the dark. Although it might seem a little bit insensitive to go hunting these poor buggers down, they can be looted for valuable items and trophies, so despite being a bit evil, there's still plenty of reward for doing so. And with them being so skinny and weak, it won't take many hits for you to put them out of their misery. There's no risk involved when taking a bolter head on, though they might still lead you into an area packed full of other infected, so you'll still have to be careful when chasing one, especially if it chooses to descend onto the city streets below, where all the howlers are. Next zombie in the list is the Charger, and if the name doesn't give it away, this infected type likes to charge at you, dishing out the damage via impact. Chargers have a rock-hard stony shell encasing their bodies, acting as both a shield and a weapon, by protecting them from your attacks, whilst also being used as a personal battering ram. Getting hit will knock you down, dealing heavy damage, though their attack patterns are predictable, and can be used against them, as unable to turn, the charges will run at you in a straight line, making it fairly easy to dodge out of the way and avoid the charges. Once they collide with a wall, you can dash on over and deal some damage from behind, due to their backs being exposed. So it can often be best to stand near a wall and essentially lead them into a trap, forcing it to dash headfirst into said wall, letting you deal the damage while it's stunned. Plus if there's any other infected forms hanging around in the area, you could quite easily persuade the charger to take them out for you too, by just letting them stand in between. Bombers once again return in Dying Light 2, having a slightly different appearance than in the first game, but generally doing the same sort of thing. These zombies have exploding organs that detonate when the player gets too close by, kind of acting like nasty looking undead proximity mines. Because they have legs though, they do have the ability to move towards you, making them even deadlier. So you're definitely going to want a dispatch of these walking bombs from afar, using ranged weapons and equipment to kill them over distance, as hitting them up close is just going to force them to explode, dealing tons of damage to yourself. Not something I'd really recommend doing. It might kill them in one hit, but it'll also probably return the favour. Another zombie that's actually quite similar to the bombers is a new one called the Drowner, which can be found in the sunken city later on in the game. Drowners have large spikes coming out of their arms and feature their own unique physical characteristics, being infected that have mutated underwater over the course of many years. Aside from their appearance though, they have very similar traits to both the virals and the bombers, frantically running towards you, swinging their arms around, whilst exploding too in closer proximities. For this reason, it can make them very deadly, having the ability to deal lots of damage whilst also being faster and more agile than a lot of other zombie types too, able to chase you down and jump between high ledges and rooftops. It's also a reason why you might want to try and dispatch of them from a distance, as if you let them get too close, you'll be putting yourself at a much higher risk. So of course, the Dying Light world's ultimate bad guys are back, and just like the first time around, they don't like to take any prisoners. Volatiles are generally the game's most notorious enemy type, being extremely strong, fast, and able to take you down instantly. And although they might not be as common as they were in the first game, they're still definitely an infected type you don't want to mess around with, having devastating melee attacks along with a spitter style range attack for when you're just out of their reach. Characterised by their muscular physiques and mandible jaw-like structure, volatiles are usually best avoided, as although they can be killed, they can withstand tons of damage whilst also being able to inflict tons of damage too. Just like gremlins, direct sunlight will kill them, and they're mainly found during story sequences and in specific indoor areas during daytime. Plus they can also come after you at night if you manage to get yourself too far into a chase. Volatiles are still sensitive to UV lighting, just like before, but down to the risk involved when taking them on, most of the time you're probably best just trying to stay out of their way whenever you come across them, which isn't really all that often. Next up is practically the Zombie Hulk. Demolishers return in Dying Light 2, and they're basically the same lumbering tough guys that they were in the first game. Big and powerful, but a little bit dumb. They were originally created due to a failed development of the virus, and a bit like the Goon, Demolishers rely on sheer strength and brute force to take you on. They have the ability to hurl projectiles at you from a distance, charge in your direction to knock you down, and also stomp on the ground to create nearby shockwaves, allowing them to attack from pretty much all ranges. They're not quite as dopey as the Goons, and they're not quite as easy to keep distance from, due to those charge attacks. Though just like the chargers, you can use that similar attack pattern against the Demolishers when they collide with a wall, getting a few hits in while they're stunned. Though it's often best to go for range attacks and using things in the environment against them to deal some extra damage from a safer distance in between. So a new mini-boss-like enemy made its way into Dying Light 2 in the form of the Revenant, an evolved form of infected that appears in GRE anomaly sites throughout the game. They're tall, lanky, and very easy to distinguish from other infected, down to their awkward stature and protruding growths that stick out of their backs, resembling wings. Revenants are typically encountered in their own small arenas, guarding GRE trailers containing inhibitors, often complemented by other infected, which they can summon to help it in a fight, giving them a buff using Toxic Mist. But they mainly prefer to attack from range, hopping around those mini arenas while lobbing acid at you, in a similar way to what the Spitters do. To take them down, it can often be best returning the favour, using ranged attacks against them, along with environmental objects like spears found in the arenas. They tend to stand around in the same place for short periods of time, charging attacks up, giving you some nice opportunities to dish out some damage, chasing them around to beat them down with melee weapons, whilst trying to avoid other infected in the area that might be around to help it. So those are all the different zombie types and special infected found in Dying Light 2's main game. Do remember that this list doesn't include any DLC monsters that might be added at a later date, nor does it focus on any specific bosses or Easter eggs either, just the main types that you can expect to see throughout the game. Hope you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up if you did, and subscribe for more guides and content in the future. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you in the next one.